Hi, everyone, and thank you for watching the Parenting Playbook with Maureen Kyle here on Fox 8 CLE+. Now, we all swear to ourselves we are not going to be the crazy sport parent, right? And that here we are. We're all doing it. We have our kids in a million activities. We feel the pressure. They feel the pressure. How does that affect us when it comes to peer pressure with our own peers, the other parents, and then also with other kids? There's a lot of statistics out there that show that this is affecting our kids in ways. Sports can definitely be positive. It can be a positive playing field, for sure. We're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about making sure that we're setting them up for success, to learn those life lessons through sports, and then also how to identify when they are feeling a negative pressure or they're feeling like they're overwhelmed. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, approximately 20% of adolescents aged 13 to 18 experience a mental health disorder in a given year. This includes conditions such as anxiety disorders or depression, and over 27 million adolescents play sports in the United States. This is just another layer of all the pressures that they're feeling, no matter where it's coming from: education, sports, maybe things that are happening at home. Our expert today is Dr. Matthew Sacco, a psychologist with the Cleveland Clinic. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I feel like we're not going to have enough time to go into this.
I agree, yes. So thanks for having me.
So in general, how do you think that the sports culture and the culture around especially youth sports has evolved, maybe since we were kids, and then just lately what you're seeing?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of positives. As I think the immediate response that we have when we look at the changes in sports is to kind of think about how much it's changed in a negative way. From the perspective of a psychologist in particular, and even in the work that I do, I see so many positive developments over the years. First and foremost, part of which even is kind of related to why I'm even here with you today, right? Because the conversations that we're having that relate to mental health, the health and well-being of our kids in general, wouldn't have happened in this way probably, I'll say 20 years. You don't have to go back 20 years. So having the opportunities to have those conversations and probably reach kids who in other times may have kind of gone unchecked, unnoticed, and kind of struggled. Mm-hmm. So that opportunity is huge, and the number of asks for, whether it's going and doing a talk for suicide awareness or going to some school to address the teen or whatever. When those numbers keep piling up, again, another immediate response is, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. But I also think about it from the standpoint of it means that people actually are listening and thinking that there's some things to do. So first and foremost, there have been some pretty impressive changes. Now, of course, the downside is I think that the absolute massive amount of pressure that kind of has been pushing downward younger and younger age kids. And of course, as parents, simultaneously, we kind of get that as well. But I think that's probably the part that is most concerning from my standpoint.
We're seeing so much more awareness around these mental health issues. We are constantly talking about recognizing those signs of anxiety and seeing where our kids are showing little signs of cry for help. At the same time, I want to kind of reiterate what you were just saying. It's younger and younger. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, there was no club sport level for a 6-year-old. And now, I am not even kidding. When my youngest was 5, I was approached by a club coach saying, hey, does she want to swim year round? And I was like, well, she's 5, Mm-hmm. It's a great opportunity. I want my kids to have this opportunity to have competition, learn resiliency, learn teamwork, but pressures go with that. Mm-hmm. So what type of pressures, where do you see the pressures coming from?
Everywhere. So that's not going to be too encouraging. Absolutely everywhere. Sometimes it just as you described, sometimes it's seemingly really it's nice to hear, like, hey, is your kid thought about, or would you, because it feels good that someone's recognized them. But are they maybe developmentally ready for all of that? So there are pressures that just come from being a part of something when maybe you're not necessarily, your kid's not necessarily old enough from a developmental standpoint, a cognitive standpoint, an emotional standpoint, to start to handle all that comes with that. The swim is a great example because those practices and things like that can get pretty intense pretty quickly versus what most of us kind of think about. Ooh, go to the rec once or twice a week and there's a swim lesson. Like, that's doable, right?
Yeah.
And kids are okay with those kinds of things. So sometimes that pressure sneaks up where that just time commitment, and they're not accustomed to that and not having those other opportunities to play. So just the environment around sports can do that.
I want to, you know what, before we even get into the kids' pressure too, let's just kind of call a spade here. It's the parents who feel the pressure first, I think. I feel like everybody, I even had a conversation yesterday at one of the sports practices one of the many sports practices I was at, where we were talking about, we feel like if we don't put our kids in this sport at a young age, they'll be behind. There's no picking it up in middle school anymore. There's no starting in 6th grade. So parents feel that pressure. If some parent is feeling that, how do we keep ourselves in check?
Okay, that's a really good question, and there's a pretty simple answer in some regards. Your kid's not behind. That's flat out. Like, when you start talking about those kinds of situations, I think the bigger concern is this idea of like feeling like they're like being left out, and that fear like they're not going to get something or they're not going to have access to it, because it's, depending on the community, of course, it can create some barriers to entry later on. But in terms of their actual ability to be successful at a sport, there are no professional athletes at 6, 7, 8. Another problem with technology is we see the videos, and I think one recently was Cal Raleigh from the Mariners, who won the home run derby this year, and they found a video of him when he was a kid, and it's a home video of him saying how he's going to win the home run derby, and they kept playing that like, look, he knew then. And in hindsight, I mean, there are probably millions of videos that we have of our kids all over the place, them saying that they're going to do something spectacular, and it just leads to this belief that when you see it connected that way, that, oh my gosh, he was maybe in 4th or 5th grade, whenever that was, look how early he knew, or look how early, and that's not the case. You know, developmentally, you know, physically, bodies change all the way up through middle school and even later. So to think that somehow kids have peaked and that they're not going to be able to learn the skills, acquire the expertise because they're not on a team in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade is absolutely, it's just fraught with so many inaccuracies. And so as a parent, I think you're not disadvantaging them.
Yeah.
It's just not the case.
Yeah. So then let's speak to the parents who their kid loves it. You know, the kid is like, can't get enough soccer. Get me out, you know, kicking the ball in the front yard or backyard, wherever it is. So you put your kid in this sport. Then where do the pressures come for that kid?
Yeah. So I think that we definitely have to start to look, you know, external from the family, at least first, because the pressures will internally, the kid will start to experience some of those pressures. But in terms of what's happening from the outside, certainly coaches, and again, I don't believe that always is that coaches are kind of ill-intended. I think just the push to motivate and to drive and things like that, kids, certain amounts of pressure is really healthy, is really good to deal with. But again, it can start to build earlier when they're doing that work. And that there are, you could probably do a YouTube or Google search for how to learn this particular skill, right? And now there's no off switch, right? So there's no, you can access that and you can kind of be working on or getting some sort of indirect feedback all the time. And so it really makes it difficult to get the benefits from that downtime, from that off time, from that space where you can kind of unplug when the worry is, well, I haven't done this enough, or I haven't done that enough in 50,000 reps or this or that. It can start to happen from there. And then the next step would be to the pressures coming from performance. And more recently, I think that this goes back to that downward push, downward pressure that we're really starting to notice just in my own practice. And it comes through listening, the language that people are using around, like the NIL money. Because what was once, at least on the surface, college athletes don't get paid.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, all the scandals when they were getting paid, broke the news and all that kind of stuff. Well, now that kind of that barrier to money making at the college level has been removed, of course, there are benefits to that where athletes can get some compensation for what they're doing. Now that has trickled down further to high school athletes where their potential payday is college. And now how do you do that? Well, you have to separate yourself. You have to differentiate yourself now in high school. Well, now how do you do that? Well, now you got to move back and you start to become this expert earlier. And that is well before many people are physically, emotionally, or psychologically developed enough to do that.
That's true. With this downward pressure, when do you start to notice, or what are some of the signs that a kid is feeling that pressure and it's affecting them in a negative way?
So, you can go as young as kids are in sport when they start participating in kind of organized team-based sports to start to pay attention. Another source of the pressure might be slightly different, but with younger kids, sometimes it's the not wanting to go to practice, but it's the why behind it, right? And if they're kicking and screaming, not wanting to go to practice, and then they get out of the car and they have the best time in the world, that's probably not a whole lot to do with what's going on. Maybe they got some other kind of nervousness or anxiety or thing like that. But if they're dreading it, they hate it when they're there, they're irritable, they're emotional. Those are the kinds of things that you might want to tune into more at a very, very young age before the brain starts to have a better ability to verbally communicate this stuff. But you also look for, as kids get older, disruptions in sleep, changes in diet. We start to say these. Some of this just sounds like being what it's like to watch or observe a normal teenager. Moodiness, irritability. One day they want one thing, and so caution not to just lump it all into that, because sometimes that, especially if they're very active in sport or a sport that they had loved for ages, they start to have some challenges with. You just have to be as observant as you can and ask questions, or have trusted people around you who know how to help them ask those questions.
I want to go more into that. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's talk about the positive ways that we can make sure that we're supporting the kids and supporting these athletes in every way we can. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are talking with Dr. Matthew Sacco, a psychologist with the Cleveland Clinic, and we're talking about sports psychology in particular. Parents, kids, coaches, there's just a cyclical pressure. We'll say it's cyclical because I know as parents we feel pressure, kids feel pressure when they're performing on the field or on the court. Coaches have that pressure to have a winning team and be molding these kids, and it can really add up to maybe some mental health issues, and we want to make sure that we're not getting into that realm. I know we do not have enough time to go into all of this, but before we get into how to support them in a positive way, I do want you to share some of the warnings that you have about how serious this pressure can get, especially when maybe some of the older athletes are feeling it.
Yeah. So first I'd say, I guess it's be very mindful that older is pretty relative. I mean, we're talking 10, 11, 12. I mean,
oh, wow.
Mindful.
I would have thought high school.
So I think that I think it's important to just be aware that, of course, if the pressures are, if we're recognizing, we're sitting here saying, oh, the pressures are occurring earlier and earlier and earlier, how kids cope. And cope doesn't mean well, but how kids deal with it. They find ways to deal with it at that, earlier and earlier and earlier as well. So from little things, we could maybe mention this before, is, if you're just noticing some changes that seem off, behavioral changes, maybe it's sleep, whatever, of course, pay attention. Sometimes, though, that what ends up, and especially in a position like I'm as a health and sport performance psychologist at the clinic, when I see people in the office, or when I see people in a more clinical setting, I get a different side of that story. So I typically get a clearer picture of some of the more severe issues that go on. And it is not uncommon, I won't say it's very common, but it is not uncommon to see in young people substance issues, drinking, prescription abuse, whether it's, we know the opiate stuff. I mean, that's years and years and years. We know the opiate epidemic. But medications for like ADHD, some of the kids are prescribed them themselves, for themselves. So being mindful of those things. And then some of the stuff as parents, it feels even heavier and scarier. And then what do you do with it when you see things? Sometimes young people will like cut themselves, and people, whether it's what we might say is more superficial cutting. It's kind of this emotional release cutting. It's hidden. It's usually under clothing or a place where people don't normally check, but sometimes, just kid, run through the house, out of the shower, or something like that. Little things that parents will pick up on. Or it's vital in these situations to make sure that you have a really good relationship, or that your child has a really good relationship with their primary care provider. Every day I'm grateful for the primary care sports providers that I work with, because we work very closely, and that relationship about what happens when they notice things, because a kid might be in for an injury or something like that, or if it's a pediatrician, making sure that there are open lines of communication there, because that's the stuff that is kind of a step in the direction of course, we want to provide help, but a step in the direction of things being more out of control than maybe we had recognized.
Yeah.
And for our own kids, often I call the things their blind spots, right? We don't see them because there are kids, and I hear this from parents all the time. I didn't even notice. Well, of course your kid isn't. If you would have noticed, you would have done something about it. It's just the reality of it. But just making sure that they have outlets, people, healthy relationships to connect with is vital in that sense.
I want to talk about maybe some of those. Let's wheel it back a little, because I mean, I even shared with you off camera. I have a 12-year-old. She's really getting into her sport. I see in the moment, and she's going, I got to get better, Mom. I have to go practice, and I have to go out in the yard, and I have to go do this. I can tell she's putting the pressure on herself to get better. But in a way, it's like, well, it's better than me telling her, get out in the yard, go practice. So there's this self-motivation. Yes. But then for anybody who's in my position, where it is a kid is very interested in a sport and has this self-motivation, I'm always trying to think of, how do I handle this? How do I make sure that I'm handling this in a mentally healthy mindset and encouraging her, but not making her think that this is her value?
Right. So from a really broad lens from this standpoint, this is describing the difference between when we focus on an environment that is more of a mastery environment, where it's not about the success isn't measured on outcome. And educational research, sport research will support this over and over and over and over and over, where effort is valued. So when you start talking about what do you do? Well, you encourage her to, okay, go out and practice. Go out and work on a skill. Language matters. It's not about go out and get better. We always say it's practice. Work on that skill. See what you can, see what you can do. What do you want to work on? What particular part of it, are you focused on? Whatever it is. But focusing on the building of mastery of that big picture. But language is an incredibly powerful piece to that. It's, like I said, effort over outcome. People will push back at that because they say, well, it makes kids soft. It doesn't. Yeah. It develops a bigger picture sense for them. And then sometimes as parents, we're the guardrails. I will often use the analogy of bumper bowling, right? And that's kind of like we're the bumpers. Yeah. And typically, if you've ever done bumper bowling, you bowl the same way, whether there's bumpers or not. Yeah. The bumpers are there just in case. And sometimes if a kid is doing too much, and it's great to see them putting in that effort, but sometimes maybe when we start talk about mastery and big picture, part of that is also learning when to take a break. Yeah. And if they don't quite have that yet, sometimes as a parent say, listen, you've been practicing for 3 or 4 hours. That's awesome. Okay, so now let's step back. Let's take a break. Let's, either let's work on something else or let's do something. But to be the bumper on that in a way that is not putting in like punishing them, but allowing them to recognize this is also part of getting better. You do have to take a step back.
Yeah. In my experience, and maybe it's just my own experience, but I have a feeling a lot of parents will also relate to this. My older children, it's easier to talk to them about effort. When they were younger, or with my youngest, you said emphasize the effort instead of the outcome, and I don't know a parent who didn't say, well, if you score a goal, or you get ice cream, or I'll give you $1, or something to motivate, especially when the kids are young. How is that? What do you think of that? And should we be changing our language with the little ones?
So I don't have that strong of a feeling for the most part.
Okay, that's actually good.
It's not a problem.
That's good. Then I don't feel like I screwed up my youngest kids.
Not at all, because here's the thing that we know. If that's done in isolation and there's never any change to that, it's a problem. But we do know as younger kids, and you think about this in school, there are age brackets in school where, and it's usually in that 3rd or 4th grade range, where oftentimes classrooms or grades will have like that basic token economy, like you do something, you get a star, or you earn like something. Part of that is helping them develop the understanding of this exchange for something like that you're doing and get a tangible reward. And with building, hopefully then they can kind of develop some more intrinsic motivation, and eventually kind of with a bigger skill set, recognize that doing it for the sake of doing it, or whatever they're getting intrinsically out of it, is the point. Sometimes I will say that there are ways to say, hey, let's go get ice cream after the game because everybody played really hard.
Okay.
Because like you can do that. It's not super complicated, but you're not permanently damaging your kids, because we've done the same thing where it's like, hey, can we just somehow get something going here? And if you do this, then we'll, you get $1 or whatever it is.
Right.
I think if that's the exclusive way that you're trying to motivate, and it isn't with the other side of things where kids are recognizing that the majority of the way that you're motivating them and caring for them, it's that their value isn't what's tied to that thing, that whether it's hitting the home run or whatever, that may be a dollar amount to that, but their value as a human being has nothing to do with what they do on the field. And that's the bigger kind of mastery piece, because you don't want them to build a sense of that their value as a human is dependent upon how they play or what they're doing. And that's the part that sometimes might get missed.
Right. And there is a sweet spot that I do want to talk about, because I feel like there's an age group where that is tricky, where they start to feel like, is this my value? And I feel like that is the ages where it does split into A and B teams, where now all of a sudden the system is putting a value on, well, you are good, you are not as good as this other group. And it's a system, and I'm seeing it with a lot of parents and a lot of kids, where that either starts to deter them from playing a sport, which is sad because you want them to go out there and have fun, and you start to see kids going, well, if I don't make the A team, I'm not a good athlete. How do you think we handle that as a family at home?
Yeah, so that's a pressure that I think it's really challenging, because oftentimes what comes with that, when a kid doesn't necessarily, get on that A team, is then what seems like a very logical and a natural thing to say, well, work real hard and you'll get there next year. So we kind of get in this weird space of it kind of cuts both ways, because yes, we want you to look at that and work harder. I think, again, back to what we said, some of that is more about the fact that that's happening earlier and earlier. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because as kids get into that, junior high, middle school, junior high, they're already doing a lot of that anyway in terms of how they assess each other and things like that. So it's not like we're creating a system that really has no reference to that.
Okay, that's a good way of thinking of it.
But I think how we talk about it and what the point of it is, because you see that it's just, even if it's baked into school.
Yeah.
Would you rather have an A or a B on your test, right? And it's kind of like it's the same system. Well, A is better. And so sometimes, again, focusing on, as a family, the more of that mastery look at things and saying, okay, well, what are the skills you want to work on? What are the things that you feel like you need to get better at? What are the things that what can I help you with? Whatever it might be, having a much more, as they get older, a much more collaborative kind of dialogue. And sometimes some parents take that as, well, my kid's not going to make the decision. But collaborative really means hearing them, taking that into account, and seeing what you can kind of do that supports exactly what they're saying. But it's a lot more effort.
It is. Before we wrap up here, I do want to ask one more question.
Sure.
Because a lot of coaches I've talked to say that they see, once the kids feel like they're not having fun, which is kind of average age 12, they see a big shift of kids dropping sports or, something that they've been very dedicated to because it's not fun anymore, whether it's they're not playing with their friends or there's been too much pressure. How do we make sure that that environment is still fun, especially around, it seems to be that key age?
Yeah. Man, if I had an answer for this, it was...
I knew I
wish I
threw
knew.
one out there for you.
I think the issue that you're describing is absolutely, it's at a core to why it is that we see some of the numbers in youth sports changing the way that we do. Because if it's not fun, why would you want to go back to it? You're not an adult. There aren't things we always say, well, not everything's going to be fun. Well, what's the point? Because if they stop having fun, they're not going to want to come back. If they don't want to come back and they end up quitting, then they never actually have the opportunity to continue to learn the skills that are going to make them better. So this idea of whatever it is, whether it's a coach recognizing that there does have to be, and some of it's a culture shift, there has to be an element of fun. And fun in being competitive or fun in winning are not like mutually exclusive. Of course, winning typically is more fun.
Right.
But anytime a kid ends a season, and you think of all the different sports that I've kind of coached for my own kids, the goal is at the end of the season to have a kid say that they want to play next year.
Yeah.
Then what happens after that in terms of the skills and what they work on and how they get better, like that can come when they're there. But it's a lot harder as they get older because other things start to take hold, like peer groups and other things that they want to do. So you end up competing with really big, heavy, forces. And so if they're not having fun in one space, or at least an element, you're going to lose them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we're going to have you back because we barely scratched the surface. But Matthew, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and I think so many parents out there are going to appreciate your perspective on all of these pressures. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to all of you for watching Parenting Playbook with Maureen Kyle. Of course, you can watch the full episodes on Fox 8 CLE Plus, constantly streaming. And we will have more great guests for you. Stay tuned. We'll see you back here next week.